My mom still says like करता की रहता है laptop लेके बैठा रहता है.
So looking back, does it look that like it was a good decision back then to start up at the age of 20?
I believe it was the best decision ever. Although that first startup didn't work at all.
If you are funding some startups, obviously the entrepreneur is at the spotlight. So what are the things in that entrepreneur that will make you trust or make you believe that ये फोड़ेगा?
All the odds are stacked against you. First of all, staying motivated as an entrepreneur is very tough. It's a lonely journey. The survival is very tough. ये दिमाग से एक कीड़ा आ जाता है ना. Once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur.
If I am working on my podcast, if I am working on a new thing, self-doubt strikes very quickly. It दिमाग से आ जाता है that am I doing something wrong? Should I be staying in this field? Should I pivot? Should I do something else? Did you also have that, and if so, how did you tackle that?
Obviously, there was a lot of self-doubt. Whatever I do, I have to do on my own. And मैं कर तभी जाऊँगा वापस. I'm only going back home when I'm able to do something.
Mr. Vineet Khurana.
Building the leaders of tomorrow only on the Yuva podcast.
It is all over the internet that you started your first startup when you were age 20. So tell me, what was the story of starting your own startup at such a young age?
So you're taking me back to the memory lane, right? Honestly, it all happened out of an accident. I must say that, right? I was studying engineering, and it was my final year of engineering back in the days. I'm talking of the year 2008. And that was essentially the time when we were all struck by the global recession. So I'd never thought of becoming an entrepreneur while being a student. To be honest, no one actually spoke about doing a startup or entrepreneurship at that time. And I come from a typical middle-class service family where no one actually spoke about starting a business. It was considered a taboo because everyone else was doing a job. So, but then, despite having 3 campus placements and being being all excited about...
What college were you in?
So, I was studying at Kurukshetra University, and, I was very excited about joining some company, or the other.
Okay, so you wanted to get into an engineering job.
So yeah, I was all excited for it.
And here we are.
And here we are. We get to know that, there is a global recession, and all these companies were deferring their placements. So all I knew at that time was the joining wasn't coming there anytime soon. We'll तो बैन ही सकते सी कुछ तो करना ही सीखा, right? So out of that willingness to not sit idle at home and do something. 2 of my acquaintances, I'd say at that time, who were placed in the same companies as me, we used to rant a lot and crib a lot on a platform called Orkut. Mm-hmm. So we were talking of pre-Facebook era, right? And that's how 3 of us met there, and 3 of us had the same opinion that we cannot sit idle at home. Hence, 3 of us decided to go to Delhi without having been there earlier. I had never traveled to Delhi. Leave aside the idea of starting a business over there. So 3 of us went there. We started something in the education domain at that point without having any exposure. We had no idea, no clue how to build a business. Leave aside the idea of starting a venture in the education domain. And it was a disaster.
Wasn't it scary?
It was damn scary. And I was actually at a point in my life when nothing came easy to me, right? Asking the family for any sort of help, financial help to be specific, was somehow against my own dignity, right? So the family opposed, and I had very little faith in myself at that time. But I said, let's explore it. Why not take a chance? Especially when you're young, right? Look at yourself. You just want to jump off the cliff.
Yeah.
Without having many strings attached to you. You just want to take a bet. And then you figure out, how to go
Looking
about it.
back, it looked like it was a good decision back then to start up at the age of 20.
I believe it was the best decision ever. Although that first startup didn't work at all for us because we
So
all had.
what was your reaction when it did not work? What did you do then? Did you get depressed? Did you feel the sadness of failure? What did you do?
So, yes, I mean, that's how you actually start judging yourself when you're too young, right? You start judging as if, and that's how we've been taught since the very beginning of our student life. Failure has always been seen as a taboo, right? So, there is always this parental pressure and societal pressure and the peer pressure. Honestly, I was the last one to quit. I was the last one to exit that business because both my co founders chose to leave very early when they didn't see any of their realities matching, of becoming millionaires overnight, of making huge money overnight, right? They chose whatever came their way naturally. One picked up a government job because he had some connects. The other one chose to study abroad because of his, whatever family pressure. For me, I wanted to keep continuing it, but then obviously there was a huge pressure of surviving in a city like Delhi.
So how were you surviving during that time?
So I actually went to my friends, my college buddies, asked them to for a place to hide, to be there and not having to pay rent. And they came in as a great help to me at that point of time.
That itself, the request of asking your buddies to give you a place to sleep, that itself is a struggle these days. If I have to ask somebody to, if I'm starting up, that hurts the dignity of the youth. I'm telling you about the present day.
Absolutely. But that one thing was clear that I didn't want to go back and, prove that my family was right, that I was taking big of a blunder of a decision to go out and start a business. So, that self-respect or dignity, or call it an ego of a young one, who just came out of the teenage, whatever you want to call it, that was pretty big. And hence, I thought that whatever I do, I have to do on my own. And I'm only going back home when I'm able to do something, when I'm able to prove myself. That's what thought process was at that.
If you're talking about proving yourself, one thing that I've noticed amongst my friends as well as in the world at large, that especially with young people, if I am working on my podcast, if I am working on a new thing, self-doubt strikes very quickly. It दिमाग च आ जाता that am I doing something wrong? Should I be staying in this field? Should I pivot? Should I do something else? Did you also have that? And if so, how did you tackle that?
Obviously, there was a lot of self-doubt. At every point, I felt as if, was there something that I could do better? Could I have picked up a job at that time, maybe tried more to get a job? There were several self-doubts, to be honest. And when you're young, these things come very naturally to you because there is a lot of sense of comparison among your peer group. भाई वो तो बहुत अच्छा कर रहा है. One friend of mine is doing so good. He's just killing it. But then, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
A lot of that actually comes to us. So self-doubts are very natural to us as human beings, and especially at a young age. But as you age, as you mature, these things start reducing, right? And then when you start going to the depth of anything that you're doing, it builds up a lot of confidence. It gives you a lot of confidence to do better at what you do and go to even more depth of it. And that depth actually brings you a lot of confidence, right? So that's how we progress. That's how we mature in life.
So after that business failed, did you pivot into a job for some time, or did you?
I thought so. Survival was becoming very tough. So
You got a job.
I got a job, thankfully, with the reference of my first cousin. It was related to engineering, telecom, VAS. Hence, I picked it up. I went to a company called 197 Communications, which is the parent concern of Paytm.
Yes.
So I joined over there. I had a brief stint of working over there for a couple of months before then moving to Bangalore.
Did you actually enjoy engineering? Like we see the most common trend is that engineers don't enjoy engineering, and that is sadly so. Did you actually enjoy engineering?
To be honest, I enjoyed being an engineer because of the very fact that it gives you the ability or the mindset to be able to solve anything. ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ engineer ਹੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜੁਗਾੜੂ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋ, right? So you become the most jugadu person, and that's what I like, right? Being able to solve any problem that comes my way. I think that mindset itself is very empowering, right? ਤੁਸੀਂ, and I think the most successful people are the ones who actually try to find ways to solve a problem faster.
This is actually called the hacker mentality these days.
The hacker mentality. Totally. Yeah.
So, sir, you talked a lot about proving yourself to the family. So, did you actually start the startup for the money? Obviously money was the concern, but was the primary motive money, or was the primary motive to prove yourself and get a tangible achievement in your hand?
To be honest, I would lie if I say money wasn't the motivation at that time. Out of whatever immaturity I had at that point of time, obviously money was also on top of my head. Survival with that money and being able to do it for a longer term was definitely there. But I think the bigger motivation was also to prove myself and build something for myself for the future. So that's how it all began. And then the natural progression, and ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਦਿਮਾਗ 'ਚ ਇੱਕ ਕੀੜਾ ਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਨਾ ਕਿ once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. That's what happened to me.
But was the word entrepreneur and startup even popular at that
Not
time?
at all. Not at
So
all.
did you have to explain to people that I'm an entrepreneur? What is an entrepreneur? Then you had to give them the definition.
Because when you speak to your family, they're still confused. my mom still says कि करता क्या रहता है, laptop लेके बैठा रहता है. She's unable to explain it to anybody, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, at that point of time, there was hardly any initiative. There was hardly anything happening with regards to a startup community. There was hardly anybody you could walk up to and say, I'm facing these kind of challenges. There was hardly any startup ecosystem at
I think
that time.
that's why we've started SACC and the Chandigarh Angels Network.
So I'll come to that later. But then, once I got into that corporate cycle, very soon I realized that I cannot be a small cog in a big engine. Although, that first startup was a big failure, but I soon realized that I wasn't made for the corporate world. I was somebody who would find happiness in building stuff. Hence, I quit my corporate stint very early in my life. And I came back with my bags packed to my home. And my mom sees me, she says, what the hell? You haven't informed us before coming. And she was like, for how many days are you here? I said, maybe forever. And then began, that exchange of looks. I still remember that. This is what, I think 14 years ago. 2010, I came back with my bags packed, thinking that I'm going to do something out of Chandigarh, right? I thought I was going to build an IT outsourcing venture.
So you were based in Chandigarh only, your family?
I was based in Chandigarh, no, but then I was living, how do I say this? I mean, when you're young, your ego is so high. I couldn't convince my family, to be honest. They were all against my decision, and there was this internal battle within the family that I had to fight. And I took a PG, started living in the same city. But one thing was absolutely clear, that I had to make it happen, and I was going to do it for a longer time. ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਿਤੇ ਨਾ ਕਿਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਪ੍ਰੂਵ ਕਰਨਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ I could do it for a longer duration and not quit it very early. So
it was a question of your ego, and that provided you the motivation or junoon.
I think that's how the entrepreneurs are, right? They especially when you're young, right? You would, I mean, the odds of you getting successful are anyway very low. Right? 9 out of 10 startups, these are the global stats, I'm not making them up, but 9 out of 10 fail in the first 3 years.
Why is this so? Why do they fail?
Because the odds are against you. All the odds are stacked against you. First of all, staying motivated as an entrepreneur is very tough. It's a lonely journey. Okay? The survival is very tough unless you have somebody supporting you. So, if you're not generating enough money, which is obviously the case with majority of these startups at the initial stages, then survival becomes very difficult. There wasn't any support system available at that point, and still, I mean, although there is a startup community, still, because it's a lonely journey, you know your struggles, you have to fight that battle on your own.
So, sir, can we say that as the startups are increasing, more and more people are getting aware about entrepreneurship? So, can we say that the odds are only going to stack up more against you, and it is going to become more and more difficult in the future to build a startup?
No, actually, it's getting much easier now, and I'll tell you the rationale why. Right? So, there are several reasons why so many people are choosing to do a startup these days. Technology, as you see, has become a commodity. Earlier, if you had to launch a venture, say you had to build an urban club, right? You had to hire people from IITs or whatever, best of the talent you had to hire to build a decent, sustainable, and a scalable product, right? So the engineering and the knowledge was very much limited, right? So there was information disparity. These days, with the help of artificial intelligence and so many platforms available, it's all commoditized. Now you can essentially generate a code. You can build an app in minutes. So if you know that you have to solve a specific problem, you have to go from point A to point B. Technology is not a problem these days. Obviously, you'll have to still have the best of the talent to build a scalable venture. But then this normal or the first checkbox of you being able to build a product or a solution is being taken care of. It's so commoditized, so democratized. I think democratized would be a better word. And then there is a lot of startup community play these days. There are organizations like TIE, which are present across the globe. Right? They facilitate providing you a platform where you can go and network with more experienced founders, talk to them, speak your heart out, learn from them. There are several other platforms. Head Start is one of the oldest organizations in this area, right? There are a lot of community meetups happening here and there. So startup community has also come to the support for all these young entrepreneurs.
So today, every second person has a startup. And there is a difference. Another community that is crawling up is of social entrepreneurship. So the thing is that there are a lot of people who are working just for the money. And there are some people who are, you must be knowing, you are there in the ecosystem, that there are some people who are working for a social cause. They don't aim to generate profits, but they aim to land even. So that whatever they are working on their principles, they want to provide service to the country, to the globe at large. So if a person is starting a startup, should the sole motivation be money, or should it be a cause or a social cause or some principles inside it?
Certainly. So, I mean, if it is all money driven, right, then eventually you're going to get disappointed. Because the first few years of starting up are very tough. Right? If you come out of a corporate or you give up your job for doing a startup, you'll be disappointed to know that your timing to be able to make enough money to match that salary can be very long, right? And the survival becomes very difficult. So the people who think that I could be an overnight millionaire by benchmarking the success stories of so many people, so many success stories that we see around, and everyone is speaking about these success stories. If you benchmark that, thinking that money can drive you, not really. Not really. 9 out of 10 entrepreneurs that you meet today who would have completed at least 5-6 years into building something, they will all tell you that you cannot be driven by money. It has to be driven by passion, because only then you can survive the failures and whatever challenges this lonely journey brings your way. Right? So it cannot be driven by money. It has to be the bigger cause or the passion. And when you speak of the social entrepreneurship, I actually salute the social entrepreneurs because they are building businesses with purpose, right? Although any business is driven by the balance sheet, any business needs money for the survival. But I know so many people who are actually genuinely putting in the effort for solving problems. And they're not driven by money, they're driven by the purpose. And that's why they survive for a longer duration in this whole journey of entrepreneurship, and then they're able to do well.
So it is such a risky journey. You have to risk your financials, you have to risk the reputation that you hold in a society, and you said that the odds are against you. So I'm asking this from a personal standpoint that if I am starting something up tomorrow, if I've started my podcast up, I'm putting a lot of hours daily into my business, into my startup. It is a very risky field. So how did you yourself mitigate those risks, and what is your advice for a young 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old who is starting up, that how can he manage those risks? And the counter question to this is, or a follow up to this is, that you said that you do not have to focus on the money, but how do you, one, in such a risky environment, how do you survive with while being so dry on money?
So here is the thing, an advice to a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old would be, or a younger myself would be, to stop being harsh on yourself. Stop putting yourself against the time and thinking that if I don't start up now, then it's not going to work for me. I meet so many young people in their teenage right now. Somebody who's a 16, 17 or an 18-year-old saying that, I'm not getting a good idea to get started, but I want to do my venture. Look, nobody can put an idea in your head. Right? People ask me, come to me, often at times they would say, give me an idea that I can work on. I said, how can I give you an idea and you can be passionate about building that business out of the idea that I give you, unless you yourself naturally figure out a problem, do enough research on it, right? And then start your startup journey. So my advice would be, do not be harsh on yourself, go easy, go slow, take some exposure, try and work with some startups, try and do internships with them. Do not go there and become an obligation for them to pay you money. Do not go there for the greed of making money through whatever stipend or salary they will pay you. But you're young, right? Yeah. There are no obligations attached. There are no strings attached. You don't have your family. You don't have to have a spouse right now. You don't have any kids at this age. So you're essentially a free bird. Try and experiment as much as you can.
So entrepreneurship is a trend these days. Everybody wants to get into entrepreneurship. But what are the actual principles of entrepreneurship, and what are the things that an entrepreneur, if you are funding some startups, obviously the entrepreneur is at the spotlight. So what are the things in that entrepreneur that will make you trust or make you believe that ये फोड़ेगा?
बहुत सही सवाल है, and there is no one answer to it. There are several ways how I would look at an entrepreneur, right? From the investing perspective. So just for the benefit of the audience and letting them know that I built this community called Chandigarh Angels Network with the help of several seasoned entrepreneurs in the Chandigarh, Tri-City and Punjab region, people who were willing to give back to the startup ecosystem. They decided to come up together and invest in the startups, besides giving them whatever mentorship could be given to them. And the objective through that was also to support some of the social impact ventures. Right? So the community stands very strong at almost 100 people at this point of time. Several investments which were not at all greed driven. There was a very balanced approach taken to to ensure that there was nothing being missold to anybody, right? So people took their own informed decisions. And then I also got the opportunity to build this community called Startup Accelerator Chamber of Commerce, SACC, through which we do the nurturing of startups at early stages, right from the incubation stage, which is more to do with grassroots entrepreneurship, to then accelerating startups across India. We keep rolling out acceleration programs, and then we built an investing arm as well, through which we invest in a lot of social impact driven ventures.
So these days, like funding is the main thing it is a goalpost. Like if I am running a startup, meko funding, I'm very happy that I have achieved something. I've got the validation. When you had started your startup or when you had moved to a PG, so at that time, was the achievement also funding? या तब funding होती नहीं थी. There was no funding as such.
Yeah, there were not many such forums available for investing in startups, especially when you spoke of a tier 2 or a tier 3 city. Now, why did I come back to Chandigarh per se? Because I found that comfort in being in my own city, being here, being closer to the family, although it's a different story altogether how I I'd openly say that out of my immaturity or that, for the lack of better words, out of my willingness to prove something and not lose that moment, how I chose to live, outside my own home setup. Living in a PG was a different and difficult thing for me as well at that point of time. But then, coming back to a tier 2 city and not finding any ecosystem here, obviously the expectations were low as well at that point of time. We hadn't seen much of an ecosystem, right? There wasn't any venture capital firm or an angel investing platform. I hadn't heard of any angel investors per se at that point of time. Hence, there was a need of bringing that community to the city, and eventually Chandigarh Angels Network happened.
That was the motivation.
That was the motivation, to not losing any founder from this region and having them go to a bigger city to start up. And I'll give you an example, a classic example. Legality is one of the startups, right, whose founders belong to Panchkula. One of the founders belongs to Panchkula. They chose to go to Gurgaon and do it from there because at that point of time, there was no ecosystem that existed. It was only after 3 or 4 years of starting up Chandigarh Angels when we came to know about them and they came to us seeking our support. And it was all due to the sheer love for the ecosystem and people from the ecosystem that we chose to invest in them at that point of time. Today, this company is massive, right? And they'll be doing revenue upwards of, say, 100 crore rupees this year. So, fantastic story coming out of the region. But then, why did the founders have to go to a city like Gurgaon, a bigger city like Gurgaon? Because of the ecosystem that existed over there. Hence, this whole pursuit of building a small but scalable ecosystem in Chandigarh is what has actually kept me motivated for years, having to interact with so many founders coming out of the city, trying to support them at whatever level, if not with money, then with any sort of push, which could be mentorship, which could be connecting them to the right set of people, which can be about giving them access to the whole network that over the time I've been able to get access to, thankfully. So all of that out of the sheer passion, I think we've been able to contribute to the startup ecosystem.
So that's great, because what motivates the youth is that there is somebody to support me. There is somebody that I can reach to and gain mentorship, gain guidance, gain the network. So you do the funding. You've seen thousands of pitches, I'm assuming. So when you are listening to a pitch, how do you know that जो ये startup है, is it going to work out or is it not going to work out, or is it solely based on the entrepreneur?
So honestly, nobody can actually predict whether that startup is going to work or not. But there are several ways to evaluate whether you shouldn't be parking your money in that startup. There are several red flags, so to say, and there are several green flags that you can eventually come up with. But honestly, whatever acumen you put into evaluating a startup, you'll still make a lot of mistakes, right? I see, looking back at my journey of evaluating so many startups, there are so many missed opportunities that we could have potentially invested into. But then there are so many good opportunities that we became a part of.
Tell me one or two of your personal stories.
Right. So and then I'll come back to the original question that you asked, right? So one or two good stories. So Biryani by Kilo is one of them. I think one of the most prominent stories in our portfolio. I literally had to beg to the founders to come down to Chandigarh and pitch to our forum, to our investors. Right. So at that time, Chandigarh Angels, which I was building at that time, was only 1.5 years old. So why would anybody believe in a small city angel network and come down to a city like Chandigarh? But the founders accepted because they were also figuring out who are the people who could, support them at that point of time. So they eventually accepted the decision. They came down to the city. They pitched to a forum. And even then, most of the people were not convinced. Yeah, biryani to bana rahe hain. Aisa bhi kya alag kar rahe hain? Right? But then I said, okay, let me go to their manufacturing facility. They had a dark kitchen model. So dark kitchen is essentially what's not visible to the world, but there is cooking happening behind the scenes. You package and then you deliver. So I went to their dark kitchen. They had their corporate office set up besides their dark kitchen. And when I looked at the process of them, how they were actually selecting the rice, how they were actually cooking that biryani, how they were packaging was beautiful, and how their entire tech was built to accept the orders and then eventually deliver the order. The loyalty program that they had built at that point of time, the way they had integrated with platforms like Zomato, which were also pretty new to the market at that point of time, that amazed me. So I shot a video, brought back to my forum people, and eventually some of them decided to ride along. They said, okay, let's accept. Some people still said, I don't see a moat in it. Biryani to hai yaar, kya ho jayega? Some people said it. And then rest is a history. Right? When we exited, we made a double-digit multiple on our initial investment. We came in at a double-digit valuation, right? Not giving the exact numbers, but less than 20 crore rupees valuation we entered. And we exited at a huge valuation almost 1.5-2 years ago. So that came in as a great motivation and conviction that angel investing actually works. That's example number one. Second is my favorite, a startup called Hargunbeer, right? So there comes a boy to pitch to a room full of investors, and the guy is very scared. He does not have the best pitching skills in the world, fumbles, is scared to pitch, but then somehow manages to pitch, right? All I could see was the honesty and integrity in the boy. And most of the people at that point, and this was like 4-5 years ago, most of the people thought, and this is also one of the parameters for evaluation of a founder. Like I said, there are many exceptions that you make, right? And honestly, anybody, I don't blame any of my investors at that point of time. Most of the people thought, how was this guy going to raise the future rounds of money if he doesn't know how to raise funding, right? So that was the biggest relevant reason at that point. But I somehow saw some integrity and honesty in the guy, right? He didn't have the money to go back to his home that day. Essentially no money left. So somehow we managed to send him back. And then he remained in touch with me. He kept telling me the updates, what he was up to. Somehow I went to one of our investors at that point. I said, "Sir, what do you think? Should we back him?" So he says, "Here, you know the obvious reasons why the group has decided to not back him. But then if he says, if you suggest and if you do a little bit of due diligence on him, I'll be ready to back him. And I took it as a signal to build a deeper interaction with him, to know what he was up to, what his plans were. So although the communication skills, for most of us, we want to judge people on the basis of communication skills, interpersonal skills, ability to fundraise comes through or is mainly judged through the interpersonal skills. Those skills were missing. But still, I felt there was a lot of integrity in the boy because I was deeply affected with one thing that he said. He said, I have an investor who is telling me to kick off the previous investor who came in very early in my startup, right? And this new investor is telling me to get rid of him and offer his equity to me, right? He says, look, I don't mind shutting down the business, but then this is against my ethics. And this is the thing that actually struck me at that point of time. I said, if he's treating his old investor very well, if he's not going against the ethics, then he's going to be the same with us. He's going to be genuine with us as well. That struck me, and rest is a history. It's one of the biggest wealth creator probably in our portfolio. So the rounds after rounds happened.
What is the boy doing now? He's still with anyway.
Yeah, he's still building it. It's a 130 plus team members company. We're very proud of what they've done.
So we've talked a lot about investing, and you yourself are deep down into the world of VC and angel investing. So explain in brief in 5 minutes that if I am a startup founder, I have no funding as of now, and what will be the process for me to get my startup funded? What is the start to the end?
2-3 things that you should ensure is number one, categorically go after only those investors that are relevant to you.
Okay.
Right? And these days, it's very easy to find out who are the relevant investors.
How do I
It's
know
very
that
easy.
what are you
It's
interested in?
very easy. Majority of the investors are on LinkedIn. Most of them have posted or would have posted their thematic areas or their vertical focus of the sectors that they're most interested in. Number one. Majority of the angel groups or VC firms would have their websites. So one out of the two can be done. Their investment thesis should be there on their website. You can find out that. And their past portfolio, the startups that they've invested in. So their pattern of investing will also be there. You would come to know whether they're sector agnostic, which means investing in every sector that comes their way, or they have a thematic focus, right? So whatever your industry is, on the basis of that, even a simple Google search query will give you more results as of today than any time in the history. Right? So it's as simple as that, finding on Google, on LinkedIn, on their websites, etc., etc. So that's point number one. Now, how will you get hold of such people? Point number two, when you figured out that this is the right investor for me. So they do a lot of posting on LinkedIn. Most of the VCs and investors, they do a lot of posting on social platforms. And LinkedIn, as of today, in my opinion, is the best platform for anybody to take leverage of. Right? When they post about their past investments or the future trends, etc., try and comment over there. Right? Try to engage with them. Try to add them to your network and send messages to them. Be as direct as possible, because when you build stories or send longer messages, look, they're being bombarded with a lot of that already on the social platforms. the right approach would be to, and this is a cold way of reaching out to people, also works very well in sales. You can actually reach out to them. And even better strategy could be to get a qualified introduction. So say somebody says that, hey, I like your business, but that's not our area of focus. Then you post a follow-up message to them. Can you please introduce me to somebody who is relevant? I'm sure your network is much bigger than mine. Can you do an introduction with somebody who will be relevant to me?
But why would you do that? If I message you and you don't know me, why would you do that?
Honestly speaking, there are several people willing to help you, but there are far less number of people that are willing to get that help.
That's a strong statement.
It's the other way around, right? So people think that there is nobody to help me. But the other way around, how it works is that a lot of people are willing to help you, but you shy away from asking for help. So that's the thing. I mean, people in the startup ecosystem, startup community really care for each other, right? Although it's not really productive for them to spend a lot of time on messaging or giving directions to people. It's counterproductive, but still there are several people who have hearts, who are willing to help the younger generation, who are willing to contribute back, right? So, and there is another approach to how you find the investors, right? You go to the networking forums, events, and then you build connections with them. When you build a connection in the physical mode, it's very easy to get their coordinates, their phone numbers, email IDs, their LinkedIn, and when you then approach them on LinkedIn, telling that it was lovely listening to you at so-and-so event.
I've personally experienced that when I've asked somebody for a podcast. I asked you for a podcast in the washroom.
Absolutely. In the washroom, yeah. We met at the Young Founder Summit.
We were in the washroom and then I asked
me, can I do a podcast? And I was like, what? He's asking me in the washroom that we should do a podcast. But that's why I'm in awe of you, because, at this age, you have such a persuasive ability. You pursue people with passion. You ask them to be a part of your journey, and I think it requires a lot of courage to pick up your phone, call somebody, repeatedly call, and ask them. So that's amazing. I haven't seen many people like you, to be honest, at this age.
Thank you so much.
And that's why I appreciate you a lot.
Thank you so much. So we were back to the investing.
Right.
How do you get invested? How do you get funding in your startup?
Sure. So after you identify who those people are and where can you find them, now is the time to approach them, right? And you should always approach them with the relevant information on what you're looking for.
Okay.
Right? Try to not cook up stories, right? But in a very short, crisp manner, you can actually build up a message that will save everybody's time, right? So try to, write to them. When you write to them, you approach them with a kind of a different approach of how you project your business. How does it differentiate from the other existing solutions? What exactly you're trying to solve, right? How exactly you're trying to solve it? What's the key differentiator over there? When you know your why, right, and you know it very strongly, it becomes very easy to convince anybody else. When you reach somebody with that clear why of why you're building it, or why should they consider you, right, is when the magic happens. So the key here is to know why you're raising money and why do you need it from them. Is it only the money that you're looking for, or is it also their expertise or years of experience into building something relevant, something similar, or funding similar startups?
I would like to interrupt you here.
Yeah.
The thing is that pehle there were the Baniya businesses, sort of. Still are. Like Zerodha is a totally bootstrapped business, and the Kamath brothers, they run it like a old school Baniya business. So we were talking about whether you require funding or not. So what is the difference exactly if let's say if you want to build a big corporate, a big MNC, can you go the bootstrapped route, or do you have to go through the funding route, through the investor route, and what are the differences between the two?
Sure. So it's absolutely not necessary to raise funding, right? It all depends on your aspiration. What do you want to build, and how fast do you want to build it, and what are you willing to lose in order to build it,
Not willing to gain, but willing to lose.
what are you willing to lose, right? So when you speak of the Kamath brothers and Zerodha story, it's amazing how they've been bootstrapping. You look at Zoho, right? Incredible story. Over 1 billion in revenue rather than valuation. Okay? So there are people who spend their years into building a business, a profitable business with a lot of conviction. And I think that Baniya approach works very well here. I mean, if I talk about my network of people, the seasoned entrepreneurs who've now become investors, they all have been running Baniya business only, with the Baniya approach only. They've been building profitable businesses. So a lot of times they get awestruck when they look at a 20-year-old somebody asking for a $10-20 million valuation after doing nothing, right? After having no revenue, no profits. और प्रॉफिट भी आएंगे तो भाई 6 साल बाद आएंगे यार लाइक हम क्या कर रहे हैं यार लाइफ में
Now
we've
now
taken
it's a
like
lot of paper money. You have the valuation on paper, but in reality, there's nothing.
correct. So it all depends on your aspirations. What do you want to build, how fast do you want to build it, and what are you willing to lose. What are you willing to lose is pretty simple. When you have investors on board, more often than not, there'll be people who will control you, who will affect your decision, who will affect the agility in your decision making. Like, as a founder, when there are no strings attached, you can take a decision like this. Abhi socha, abhi kiya. But when you have stakeholders on your cap table, yaar, aapko board ka approval bhi lena hai. You have to inform your investors before doing any heavy spend. You have to take their decision, their confirmation. You have to keep them in agreement before taking any such decision. So no hasty decisions, and no such decisions that can badly affect your venture, right? That binds you a lot. You lose equity for sure. That's the single most valuable thing for you as a founder. It means everything to you, right? So you obviously lose equity, you lose some part of your ownership, you lose some part of your decision making. Let's accept it, right? So these are the lows. And the highs are very subjective, depends on whom you're taking money from, and do they bring any strategic value to you as a founder or your startup? Are they really aligned with the business? Do they have any similar experience of building their own enterprise? Do they have a good network that can help you? Right? So are they strategically aligned with you? If yes, great. Then keep asking them for their intervention, positive intervention wherever you need it. And I think it can do wonders to you. I mean, besides that money, which can come to you from several other avenues, the government is giving a lot of push these days. So a smaller check can be availed through an incubator or an accelerator. There are several debt schemes as well. There is Startup India Seed Fund Scheme. Then there are several banks that are availing, that are giving you schemes that you can avail, like PMEGP, Mudra, so on and so forth. And there are subsidized loans available to the founders these days. But if you want smart money is money that comes with great advice from people who've been there, done that. Then you have to get in touch with the relevant people, offer a part of your equity, and then get them on board. That's how it works.
Sir, at the last, I would like to ask you that the startup ecosystem in India has been booming. 2-3 years, since 2-3 years, we are seeing a lot of startups coming up in India, a lot of unicorns. So, from a VC perspective, from an angel investing perspective, I want to ask you that why is this so? That why is the startup ecosystem booming in India? Obviously, the government is supporting it, but what is the innate reason behind it, and is it still going to boom in the upcoming 10 years?
Sure. So startup ecosystem is actually booming for the last 1 decade now, right? Not just 2-3 years. When you look at startup ecosystem, for a minute, let's keep venture capital outside it for a moment, right? When you look at the pure play startup ecosystem, the government has done a wonderful job, in terms of bringing the seed capital, making it accessible to the founders, the first-time founders, and giving their support to so many incubators and accelerators that have given a great platform to the founders, right? So you now know that you as a founder, you're not alone. You have somebody backing you. You have that mentorship accessible to you. Now, even building a deep technology product these days is relatively easier because you have the access to several labs and infrastructure and resources made available to you by incubators, right? And all of that is supported by the government, either the state government or the central government. So, why is it on a rise? Is obviously due to the government intervention, number one, which is definitely helped in building a conducive startup ecosystem. So the youth have a lot of conviction now that nothing is impossible. People are building their businesses in space technology as well, right? There are startups like Agnikul that are building what kind of technology. I'm really proud of what they're building. And then the youth today, I think that's much bigger of a factor. The youth today is very aspirational.
Yes.
Right? So there hasn't been a time in the history when the youth has been so comfortable in taking risk. And the major and bigger credit should go to our parents and their parents, right, our forefathers, who actually saw that hard time to be able to give us a comfortable time so we can experiment a lot and not be worried about not having the roof on your head,
Yes.
right? Not having to fight with the basic necessities in life. End of the day, खाना तो मिल ही जाएगा ना घर पे.
Yes.
उसकी struggle तो नहीं होगी ना. Bus stop पे तो नहीं सोना पड़ेगा ना. In most of the cases, 9 out of 10 people are not going to maybe struggle with that, right? So, because our parents have done a lot of hard work in the past, so it has actually given a great cushioning to the younger generation to be able to take the risk. And hence, the risk-taking appetite has gone up like anything, right? The youth today is much more informed, right? There used to be information asymmetry, earlier 10, 20, 30 years ago. You had no clue what's happening. But today, look at it. The information is so accessible, right? You can build anything. You can build your personal brand on social media. There is faster internet. There is such a great infrastructure available. So that ease of doing business when it comes to anybody willing to take a decision has actually gone up. Although there is a lot of bigger and more scope for the government to be able to bring more ease in terms of supporting businesses and the startups when it comes to regulatory challenges, when it comes to registering a business, when it comes to whatnot. I mean, there are several things, several areas of bringing improvement, right? But believe me, as of today, VCs are sitting on piles of cash. But there are less number of startups that can actually get that money from them and make their money work. Right? So
What do you mean by
there is excessive capital available in the market.
Okay.
There is excess of capital, but then there are less number of good startups.
अच्छा मतलब पैसा है
पैसा
लेने वाला चाहिए.
लेने वाले अच्छे फाउंडर्स, अच्छे स्टार्टअप्स नहीं है उतने, राइट? सो who can actually do justice to that money, or who can actually help the VCs grow their money. End of the day, VCs are also taking care of somebody's money. They're managing somebody's money. They deploy money, they make more money, give returns to their investors. Right? So all of these factors are definitely the ones who are fueling the startup ecosystem, and more young people are willing to do their ventures at a younger age. That's why you see a 17-year-old sitting in front of me running an initiative, and he can build the next big thing in the world. The Yuva podcast can be the next big thing. I have no doubts in it.
Thank you so much.
If you keep consistently building your stuff, I have no doubts that sky is the limit for you.